right, this is The Sit Down. I'm here with Cynthia Nixon, a Democratic candidate for the governor of New York State, as you all know. Okay, we're going to start. It is very cold in the studio.
It's a little chilly, I have to admit, but I got a hot tea, and that was helpful.
Okay, good. So I do want to apologize. I'm wearing a jacket for a reason. This isn't just for the look.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, for people who... going into the debate with Cuomo and just kind of raising that as an issue, for people who don't get why that just is at least worth mentioning, the temperature.
Right. I mean, one of the things about the debate was we had committed to 2 different debates very early on, and we kept waiting to hear from him. He committed to a 3rd debate and had set all of the terms. Every single term of what the debate was going to be like, but we thought let's at least weigh in on the temperature, because he's infamous for having the temperature at his press conferences at 60 degrees, and reporters are always complaining that they're frostbitten and they can't actually even type.
That's wild.
So we asked for 76. We got 69. So it was a nice in between.
New York State politics, I can't. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you for fighting for that. Okay, because listen, it's
because
cold.
look, a lot of women.
It's freezing.
I mean, it's in offices, women are always freezing, and men discount it, and
especially if they're wearing suits and all.
Exactly. But you know, women need to weigh in on the temperature as well.
I like it. Okay, well, we've got to get into this tweet from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. He tweeted, "The mayor sent by the New York Democratic Party in the 11th hour falsely attacking Cynthia Nixon is beyond unacceptable. It's downright Trumpian. A tweeted apology calling it a mistake is laughable. The state party must compensate the Nixon campaign immediately." Pretty wild 11th hour moment. What were your thoughts when you first found out about the mailer?
I was appalled. I was really angry. I am the mother of Jewish children whose grandparents narrowly survived the Holocaust and had a lot of family who actually didn't survive. The idea that they would accuse me of being soft on anti-Semitism is an outrage. We belong to a temple. We were at services last night. You know, my kids were both bar mitzvahed. It's really, as the New York Times says, this is dirty, sleazy politics at its worst. And yes, the New York State Democratic Committee has a lot to answer for, and it would be really good. This was not a mistake. A lot of people actually had to approve of this and get it together and sign off on it and create it and mail it out. But I think the idea that Andrew Cuomo didn't know that it was happening is completely bogus. And I think he actually owes an apology, not just to say it was unfortunate or a mistake or inappropriate, but it's factually wrong. It's a smear, and it's a really nasty smear at a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise. This is fear-mongering for political gain at its worst, and it's completely untrue, and I'm very angry about it.
Very angry. Do you think Cuomo should call for Jeff Berman to resign?
I think whoever is responsible, yes, should have to resign. But I also think that pinning it on people in the Democratic State Party escapes the, it shifts the blame. And I think there is no way that the mailer is being sent out without Governor Cuomo or at least his administration's complete approval. So I think we don't want to move the focus away from Governor Cuomo here, because he actually has to take responsibility for this.
Okay. Speaking of Mayor de Blasio, he made the decision not to endorse anyone. What do you make of that?
I make of that Andrew Cuomo is notoriously vindictive, and that Bill de Blasio has to think of the people of New York City first and foremost. And I completely understand his decision.
Yeah, you do. As you've been coming up, I am sure a question that I got, and I asked people on Twitter for feedback and thoughts, and a lot of people asked in part, you're new to politics, and running for governor as opposed to perhaps like a city level position is a question that a few people had. What would you say to people who say, why aren't you running for something in the city?
I would say because so much of what is wrong in New York State has to do with who our governor is. I'm not an Albany insider, but I've actually been fighting on a lot of issues in Albany for a long time.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. So I've been fighting for better school funding, and particularly more equal school funding for New York schools for 17 years, since my oldest child entered kindergarten. And I've been fighting for a lawsuit, which is like our generation's Brown versus the Board of Education, which says that the children of New York State are having their constitutional rights violated by how little is being spent, most especially in our black and brown communities, on education. We're the second most unequal state when it comes to education funding. And we are the single most unequal state in the entire country, and it's not just because we have Wall Street and so many wealthy people here. It's because we have such deep poverty. We have more than half the kids in our upstate cities living below the poverty line, and a city in New York, Syracuse, has the most concentrated black and brown poverty of any single city in the entire United States. And Andrew Cuomo has a lot of experience in politics and in Albany, but it doesn't actually mean he's good at governing. It doesn't mean he's not interested in addressing inequality. He's interested in giving tax breaks to corporations and the wealthiest. And there are so many instances where you look at how he is woefully mismanaged. Certainly the New York City subway. He has made decision after decision that has led us to this crisis in the New York City subway. Hundreds of millions of dollars in economic development money have been put in the pockets of his donors with little job creation to show. And the top members of his administration, his chief aide and his economic development czar, are headed to prison. Right. So if you're looking for somebody who is good at governing, Andrew Cuomo would not be my candidate. This past weekend, he opened a bridge that he named after his father in a campaign stunt before it was ready and put New Yorkers' lives in danger. Engineers rushed in a few hours later and shut it down because it was actually a very dangerous thing to do. This, to me, is not an example of a man who's actually good at governing.
Okay. You very accurately, right, and rightfully note that you were proud of the fact that you were an outsider to New York State politics, as you've mentioned.
And an outsider who's not accepting any corporate donations.
Right, and that's a strength. On the other hand, though, I think it's also a fair argument to be made, but wait a minute, New York State politics, as you point out, notoriously corrupt, right?
Yes, exactly.
So how would you respond to people who say it seems a bit naive entering into that space?
But we've had people who've run saying they were going to clean up New York politics, but they've all been creatures of Albany. They've all been part of creating that culture. And the problems that New York faces, it's not that we don't understand the solutions. It's that we don't have the political will to do it. So I would reinstate the Moreland Commission. That is something that was doing a great job rooting out corruption. It came too close to Andrew Cuomo and his donors, and he shut it down overnight. We just don't have the political will to do these things. We have the solutions. We know where the funding needs to go in our schools. We know how to fix the New York City subway. We know how to do economic development money, spend it so that it actually creates jobs by investing in infrastructure and in minority and women-owned businesses rather than giving payoffs to huge corporations. The question is not a matter of understanding the nuances of the problem or the complicatedness of the solution. We have the solutions. What we don't have is a governor who will fight for these solutions because he doesn't want to alienate his corporate and Republican donors.
Okay. Has it been challenging to communicate and reach out to people in the state of New York outside of New York City? Like here, girl, you mentioned subways to me, and I'm like, okay, that's a big deal. In some ways, easier perhaps to connect to New York City-based voters. But for people in Albany and other parts of the state, have you felt that you've done a good job of bridging that gap?
I do, and what I find is that actually New York City is so focused on New York City, but across New York State, they're actually far more focused on Andrew Cuomo, and so they're far more aware of his failings and far more aware that the billions of dollars that have been spent in economic development to create jobs have done a really poor job of it, and particularly when you're talking about communities of color. When I talk to minority and women business owners in upstate New York, they say, we know this money is being spent and we can't get anywhere near it because it's being apportioned in an old boys club way. And transportation is an enormous issue, not just in New York City, but across the state where we have these transportation deserts because gentrification is pushing people out. We need a much greater investment in transportation, and we need New York to be a leader in renewable energy. When I'm governor, I'll pass the Climate and Communities Protection Act, which will hold corporate polluters accountable and will create 100,000 plus good jobs across the state in those parts of the state that need it most.
BuzzFeed News broke the story that the Human Rights Campaign, a very important LGBT organization, did not endorse you, nor did Hillary Clinton. But to focus on HRC, the organization, not the woman, I wanted to ask you, as two queer people, what did that feel like? To not have the support of that particular queer organization? It
was not a surprise to me. Okay. Look, he's a two-term incumbent governor. He's a dynastic governor, son of Mario Cuomo. Mm-hmm. Every establishment endorsement that he gets, none of these came as a surprise to me. This is a people-powered campaign. This is not based on endorsement. This is based on reaching out to voters and speaking to them about issues, speaking to them about the economic, the racial, the gender inequality that's swallowing our state whole, the need for making New York a real sanctuary state, which we could do. When I'm governor, on my first day, I'll sign an executive order and we'll expand access to driver's licenses for undocumented people. And we'll staunch the flow of deportations. If we had a governor who really cared about that, as opposed to just anti-Trump rhetoric, he would have done this a long time ago. If he really cared about ending mass incarceration in this state, he would have fought for ending cash bail.
Well before a race. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, he paid a lot of lip service to it this year, but he didn't include it in his budget, which is why the brother of Khalif Browder has endorsed me for governor. It's one of the endorsements that I'm proudest of. This was a 16-year-old black kid who was accused of stealing a backpack, who spent 3 years in Rikers, 800 days in solitary, frequently beaten by guards and other prisoners because he didn't have $3,000 bail. And Governor Cuomo used Akeem and his family as props and then didn't include Khalif's law in the budget. And this is what we see. Governor Cuomo is really great at grabbing headlines and appearing progressive, but when you look at the actual change that he's fought for and the actual change that he's brought, there's very little to show.
Absolutely. And that BuzzFeed published that story about the Human Rights Campaign. We didn't break it. I wanted to ask also about, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Andrew Gillum, all candidates, who were perceived as long shots, or maybe not perceived as all by like a lot of gatekeepers before their breakout wins.
Yes.
Do you see yourself in a similar space?
I think that we're at an incredible progressive moment, and the polls are not capturing it, and the media is frankly not capturing it till after it happens, right? And then they're shocked and excited. What we're seeing is, I mean, in New York State alone, in the last 2 years, inspired by Bernie Sanders and horrified by Donald Trump, almost as many new Democrats have registered to vote as voted in the last gubernatorial election. Almost 600,000. And this is what we're seeing. And this is a new kind of voter. This is a younger, more diverse, more progressive voter. And we just have to be sure that those voters know they're making a difference. They're, how many people-powered campaigns, how many people who are rejecting corporate money, people who are long shots, people of color, women, queer people are being elected to office, some of them running for the first time, like myself. And we just have to be sure that young people particularly don't get discouraged and we really keep turning out, because what happened in the presidential election is not enough people turned out. And we have to, as a Democratic Party, I believe, really give people something to turn out and vote for, not just something to vote against. We have to be not just a kinder, gentler, more diverse version of the Republican Party. We have to say single payer is not just a dream, it can be a reality if we fight for it. 100% renewable energy is a direction we need to be going. Universal rent control is something that we need to fight for, and the more we keep putting forth candidates that do that will fight for those things and will distance themselves from corporate money, the more people are going to start to believe in the Democratic Party again and turn out for us.
To that point, we have another question from Twitter. A viewer wanted me to ask you about your decision not to accept the governor's salary. And she said, but don't you think that it sets a bad precedent that only people who could afford not to have that kind of salary could run?
I think that no, I think it's an individual choice, and I think by and large, this is nothing that I would advocate for anybody else. I think it's important for people to be paid for the work that they do, and particularly we really need more working class people to run for office, and that's what we're seeing with candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley and so many people who are running for office for the first time. We need our candidates to be diverse in every way, including economically.
Absolutely. Here's another Twitter question from Karen J. Phillips. You tweeted this question, Karen, since you talk about marijuana and how it's affected people of color, was your weed man or woman a person of color?
Was my what?
He's basically asking, was your weed dealer a person of color?
I don't have a weed dealer. Is that the question?
That's fair. That's
I'm afraid I'm not a smoker. I'm not a smoker myself, but I think it's really important, and I think it's really emblematic of the things that we should be passing here in New York.
Right.
Without even giving it a second thought. 8 other states have passed it. The District of Columbia. It's a racial justice issue.
Yeah, and to that point, as we think about marijuana legalization, what would you do to ensure that people of color, black and brown people in particular, who, just been devastated by the war on drugs, that they would be included in a legalized marijuana industry in New York?
Well, so I think we should look to what they're doing in Oakland, California, what they're doing in Massachusetts, and I think we should build on those models, that half the licenses should be reserved to be prioritized for individuals and communities that have been the most targeted by the war on drugs, and not just the licenses themselves, but small business loans and other supports. And we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry. It can't just be people like John Boehner, white wealthy capitalists like John Boehner who are getting rich from this. But we also have to ensure, we're going to be seeing tens of millions of dollars in states' revenue, and I think that also needs to be put back into the community in terms of education, in terms of job training, in terms of we need to get people out of prison who are there for marijuana arrests, and we need to expunge their records, and I think this tax revenue should also be used to help transition out of prison and back into regular life.
Absolutely. Important part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Cynthia Nixon, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
And I just want to say, the election is Thursday, September 13th.
September 13th.
In New York. If you're a registered voter, please turn out and vote, and know that you have a progressive alternative here, and we can make New York the capital of the resistance, not let California keep getting all the glory.
Oh, okay. All right. You have it there, folks. Cynthia, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much.
September 13th. Get there.
Thursday.
All right. Stay tuned. More AM to DM in a moment, friends. Thank you again.
Thanks.